Oh, hey everybody. Thanks for
Hi.
joining the call.
Yeah.
We got Tony Horvath and Mark. Hey guys. And Kevin. And then Matt Lawler's going to join us, our project historian, maybe. He said he would, but he has computer troubles. So all right, here we are.
I like the real time, 70 years later or almost 90 year later updates he's been doing on
Yeah,
on
it's cool.
It's kind of fun to watch that, in real time, just the struggles they were having.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we get day by day.
Yeah.
It's I don't know if we do that every year because it's going to be repeating the same information, but I thought it was really fun to see like this is what was happening exactly 90 years ago.
Yeah.
Or no, 89 years ago.
Mhm.
89.
Next year will be 90.
Better
Which is
hurry
why you
up.
need to be, yeah, that's why we need to be done next year.
That's
Yeah.
it.
It's right here. It's a little off scale, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's my Taylorcraft. I keep telling Tony that all the Bulldog is the Taylorcraft when you break it down. It's the same thing. It's
Right.
got gear legs and pants, and it's got a little hinge up there where the wings attaches and a strut. I mean, it's the same exact thing. Got an engine.
Yeah.
Same thing.
That's it.
So I mean, we really just need to talk about where we are.
Mhm.
That's all this is about. Matt actually brought this idea of having just kind of a powwow because we haven't talked for a little bit and we've kind of stalled a lot of the process. Just we got stuck honestly because we weren't sure what the thing looked like. We can't build the Bulldog unless we know what it looks like. And now we kind of think have solved a lot of that. And we have the ribs, we have the spars and laminated but not cut. There's still some decisions left to make on the wings, I think.
Yes.
But then we have to get the fuselage redone because it turns out the fuselage we have is very heavy. And I think if I could just start there, Tony, you weighed tell us about that because it was
the numbers in front of me here. So we got pictures of it, and if this ever becomes something we want to post, we could add the pictures in of the airplane hanging. But effectively, and Kevin's been up to date on this, but this is all for history's sake. The fuselage we have, including the tail feathers, including the landing gear, including the wheels and tires, not including the brakes, was 544 pounds.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of weight for what it is.
Yeah. And what do you think it should? What can we get it down to? What would be realistic?
Maybe my ignorance, but I think we're about 200 pounds heavy on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say between 250 and 300 pounds for that set of stuff shouldn't be difficult. It shouldn't be hard for one person to move the fuselage. Right. So the fuselage frame.
Yeah, no, that weight, to be fair, that weight is not just the fuselage truss, it's also the tail pieces and the landing gear as well, right? Which are really beefy.
Right.
Correct. So let me breaking down my numbers here. Gear leg stripped. Fuselage frame was 233 pounds. Just the frame with nothing on it. We stripped everything off of it, with the exception of the seat was left in it, but the landing gear off it, all that. The rudder was 9 pounds. The vertical fin was 15 pounds. The elevators are 12 pounds, which are both elevators, by the way. They're tied together. Horizontals 42 pounds. There's tens of pounds to lose in each one of those components. But the fuselage frame at 233 pounds just seems, and that was minus the engine mount. The engine mount was 36 pounds, which honestly, there's not a huge amount of weight to lose in the engine mount because it is going to weigh something. It's got a big job to do. But it's a little heavy. It could be lighter, and it's the knuckles and stuff that he added onto it later that have really added some weight.
I was telling Tony, just as a comparison, I don't remember what the Z fuselage frame weighed, but I could pick it up and move it by myself.
Yeah.
I could just pick it up and walk off with it. So it wasn't 200 and some odd pounds.
And
Yeah.
Tony, you did that S111B. I think you said the truss was like 70 pounds, 75 pounds, something like that.
I don't think it's that. Yeah, S1T fuselage frame is 56 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
So a little more for an S111, but not 10 pounds, for instance. So, and that's got a 330 horse 540 on it, which is the one we put on Josh's kind of the raw engine weight's 275 pounds just for 275, and that's a lightened up engine. So, but they have 400-pound 540s hanging off the front just for weight comparison. And
yeah. So what makes it so heavy? Is it really thick walled tubing? Is just thick tubing? Just for our viewers, why is it so heavy?
We were very, very fortunate that Jim Jenkins gave us the the order from Dillsburg, who used to be where you get tubing in any kind of quantity. And, he doesn't have any, it's all heavy tubing. I mean, there's no 049, it's 0058, all 065. And right now it's got 1.25" longerons past the cockpit at 058. And then after that, it's 1.125" going back to the tail post, which is, just, it's quite heavy for what we know to be the minimum nowadays, or kind of the standard for those sizes.
Yeah. So, and then as everybody here knows, we don't really know exactly what the truss was like in the real aircraft. It probably was a little bit overbuilt because they didn't maybe have as much experience, or maybe as large of a database of experience, as we can draw on. But but we do think we have the right truss, or Jim Jenkins had the right truss shape, the right layout, because we have some drawings to help us with that. So we think that it's done correctly. It's just maybe heavier than it needs to be, maybe correctly heavy compared to what it was in the past, but there's no reason for us to have that much weight. So no judgment of his design work. It's just, we can save weight, and we should, because a human's going to be inside there, and that's safer for him, I think, is where we're at with it. So unfortunately, that means we're not going to be able to use that fuselage truss. It also turns out, and Kevin, we've talked about this at length, that it's a little stubby. It doesn't actually match the shape of the aircraft anyway. Now that, again, is because the drawings that he had, which are otherwise very reliable, seem to come up short in that one area. And I mean that as a pun. They're not correct. So if we had to use those plans, we would have duplicated his work pretty much exactly religiously. It's correct. But also for that reason, we need to move on from that fuselage truss and design our own. Am I getting everything right, Kevin?
Yep.
Yeah, and I think you kind of touching back to where when we first took Josh's work, with the surfaces, and we started looking at it, and we're looking at trying to get it to look like the photos that you had pulled out of the film, getting the angles right. And you made the comment, Jim. You said, "Wow, it just looks like it's too pudgy in the middle," and something like that. And I think it was truly an aspect ratio issue more than the diameters being incorrect. And when I showed you guys some stuff where I actually stretched it, I think 8.5 inches, and the aspect ratio started looking a little bit more correct to the eye. I mean, that's all we can really go by, is what we can see in the photos and what's correct to the eye. And Vern did some beautiful drawings, and some of the other guys too. And the best they can do is what they see and try to transfer that to the paper. And what's interesting now is I start working in 3D surfaces like you guys generated, and we bring that into CAD, and you start actually putting numbers to it and dimension and scale it to human. And you can start to see, now a pencil line is 6 inches.
Yeah.
It's no longer just, a little speck, and it really starts to make sense as it comes together. So I think, the tubing a lot of times in projects on like this, if you don't know, the tendency is to put a little bit more. Let's make that fitting a little bit thicker. Let's make the tubing a little bit heavier, or let's put an extra brace in here, just if you don't know. But today we can go through and we can analyze the structure. We can get the shape the way we want it, put the tubes I really love that one photograph you guys have of the sitting on sawhorses, just the bare tube frame with someone sitting in it, because that really tells you how basic the structure was. It doesn't have nearly as many crazy things going on inside it that you might think. Yeah. And I really think some of the stuff that Vern drew in for the landing gear, how he just made assumptions of what the landing gear mechanisms may have looked like once it went inside the fuselage, because there are no real pictures of that. I think some of those assumptions actually make the landing gear legs themselves heavier than they really need to be. Definitely more complicated to build. So, there's some things there that, and especially now, I don't think you're going to intend to fly from LA to Cleveland and do the Bendix race. So we don't really need as much fuel in the airplane and the tanks and all this stuff. So we can actually have what I would consider a more proper structure on gear mounting, actuation, everything, without really starving you of not having enough fuel to get from A to B.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Let me bring Matt in just real quick, because Matt joined us. We're recording the call for everybody. I think the one question we have for you is, do you think we're likely to get any more information than we have right now? I think it sounds like you've kind of exhausted every resource we have. Is there anything left to wait on, or should we just move forward with what we have?
I think that's where you're at. The safe answer is we've reached a point where we have to move forward with what we have. My experience in this, and I've been looking for Bulldog information for well over a decade now. It pops up in the weirdest places and they come in randomly from people. And I know, Jim, that's always been our fear, is that, one day someone's going to knock on our door when we're, taxiing down the runway for our first flight, and they're going to hand over, like, here's an entire set of plans. Here you go.
Yeah.
They've been sitting in grandpa's steamer trunk for the last 90 years. But yeah, we've looked at every major institution. We've talked to universities and their archives. The Hall family has shared everything they possibly have with us. I think, I'm always hopeful, and I would love to see more come, but we can't depend on that, and I don't know where it would come from if it does. So, yeah.
One more source that I talked to Jim a little bit about that is a little bit new is a guy named Conrad called me the other day, and we were talking about unrelated Hall Bulldog stuff. And he, so we started to talk about the Bulldog, unrelated Bob Hall designs. And we started to talk about the Bulldog. And he goes, oh yeah, this guy next to me, he was building a replica, years ago. It's still out in his backyard. And it went through this, he had a hangar fire and the thing burnt down. So I've gotten in touch with the guy, had an initial conversation. We chatted just briefly. He had to go back to work. And he goes, yeah, I had the thing done just about, I had the fuselage covered and the engine hanging on it, and I was getting close, and then the hangar burnt down, and I just lost all interest. So I haven't been able to probe him more about information if he's got any, but we're hoping to make that connection. I don't know how hard to push to get info out of him, because I want to be friendly, and it's clearly, again, his dream that has gone south on him. So, you get a little touchy-feely and try to be nice to people and not push too hard.
What part of the country is he in? Is he out of your way somewhere?
Texas. No. Go on him go. His name is Rusty Linderman, and he is in Hondo, Texas.
And possibly he'll have some more information for us. Who knows? So we'll have to start, be gentle and talk to him. But I think, Matt, I feel very confident we have all the information we need at this point. Obviously, the internal structures we don't have. But we have enough information that we can figure out close enough. We can make maybe some better, so we can make some improvements in some ways. And Kevin, I just want to go on to that now, because you were bringing it up. I want to bring it back to what you were saying about the gear in particular, because we have a list of concessions we really have to make. We're going to have modern brakes. We're going to have a tail wheel, now tail skid. I've mentioned these things before. Then we got into some of these are tough, like the engine, which we'll talk about a little bit too. Then the gear. The main gear, the arrangement on the Vern Clements drawings is really cool. And I have to say, I watched the video, the little bit of video we have at landing, and I think it might be correct that the gear is anchored in the center of the aircraft. It's a really interesting idea. It's probably, from an engineering standpoint, a bad choice, but I really think it might be correct based on what I see in the video. And go ahead and tell me what you think so far.
Yeah, I think it's pivots in the center of the airplane, but I don't think the gear legs are a boomerang the way that they're built. One, with a split fork and to straddle a station of the fuselage. Mm-hmm. If I've done some research. It's one of these things where we kind of look at what else did Bob Hall use that landing gear in, and it's the gull-wing Stensons. So I've gotten information about the gull-wing Stenson legs and what they how they're made. Shared some of that with you guys, and it's they're heat treated, they're thinner material than you would have thought, things like that, so they're not so heavy. And the real difference between a gull-wing Stenson and the Bulldog is the pivot point is near the side of the fuselage, and the shock strut is inboard underneath the seats of the cabin. So it's a rocker rather than being the shock strut outboard like this is. But when the gear leg itself sweeps forward just like this does, yet it's straight. It's a tapered gear leg, and it comes to a pivot point in the center, but then spread apart because it's a 4-place airplane. So I really think the legs probably look more like that, and I did some temporary modeling just kind of to mock it up. And then I don't know if we can pull up that photo that I was talking about of the the naked airframe?
Yeah, I can try and do that if I have it. Keep talking while I try and do that.
Sure.
If I don't do it now, we'll get it in there later when we put the video up.
Okay.
So let's pretend it's there now. Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
There's that photo, and then there's also the photo of the airplane, with the sheet metal off. They're hanging the engine, and you look at that, and if you start looking at it with the thought of the landing gear, it doesn't look like that landing gear is straddling that front bay.
Correct.
It
Yeah,
looks like
I think it runs in after that bay and terminates at the center of the airplane before it gets to the next bay back.
Yep.
In that naked airframe photograph, the next bay back is quite substantial, has a bunch of braces and diagonals to it in it, and the front bay doesn't. So I don't think that big, huge wheel hub of a weldment that's in the middle of the structure that Jim did is correct. And that's really where I think Vern missed the boat, is that he just assumed it's going in the airplane at that bay, it must turn the corner and go square in to be able to hinge. And that, they've got one that straddles the other. And I think it was all to a common pivot shaft between those two bays, spanning that bay of the fuselage, which kind of starts to make sense when you think about the fuel quantities and where they were putting fuel. If you turn the corner like that, the way that it is, the legs are now, and then had that kicker, you could get a lot more gas in the fuselage than what I think they really did. I think the legs were occupying that space.
Is this a good picture to show you, or which one do you want to look at?
I think he was referring to the guy sitting in the fuselage.
Yeah, the vintage photo on the sawhorses.
Okay, but you were talking about this one also, right? I wasn't paying attention to you while you were talking just now because I was. Just give me a second here.
That photo, Jim, is the one that Kevin and I have been kind of sharing. Those are the actual what we have now, with the exception of the gear legs. That's Kevin's new version of the gear leg. So that's the fuselage frame as we have now. Which, interestingly, we set this fuselage frame on sawhorses and dropped plumb bobs, took measurements, and went around and around and got it modeled in 2D, because I work in 2D. I'm not as cool as Kevin. And it was really, and then we overlaid it onto the original Vern drawings. I have the Vern drawings blown up full scale, and it fits so close. I mean, there's no doubt that Jenkins scaled off just like you would, scaled off the drawing.
There it is.
There we go.
Yeah. So right where your cursor is now, you can see diagonally coming down to the longeron. It looks like a massive tube coming diagonal right there. And then you can see the shaft, the pivot shaft running forward to the firewall station, and then just a simple X in the firewall instead of having the stuff that's in the frame now. So it looks like to me all the primary load is happening in that second bay. You got diagonals going up, you got these extra braces coming down. That's where all the load was being applied in from the landing gear.
And it makes more sense. I agree, because the obviously if you have the truss in front of you, Tony, and no one else can see it, but there's really no room for the pilot's feet for the rudder pedals the way it is right now, because of reinforcements that were added to strengthen that area where the landing gear would go. Now I want to say that you can show that. I want to say that somewhere we have notes from Bob Hall or someone that said that the let me stop sharing the screen so people can see that. Tony, just a second.
Yeah.
Somewhere we have notes from Bob Hall that the gear always chattered. So whatever they came up with, they weren't really happy with, by the way. Go ahead, Tony. Speak so that the camera gets focused to you.
Yeah. Okay. So what Jim's referring to is right now, we've got this structure in here, and let's kind of walk around just a little bit and see it, so we can see what we're up against. There's this giant, it looks like an old wagon wheel to me in the middle where they're trying to reinforce all this. The gear comes around, and it does this dog leg. It comes up, dog legs through here, and it's actually sharing, going over the tube, and it rides over this tube. And I think, originally Vern and Primo, right? The idea was that was taking all the loads, that this was rolling fore and aft, and that was supposedly taking the loads. But I just don't see it in that drawing or in the picture that we have of the raw frame. It doesn't make sense to have any structure back here if that's the case in the second bay. Over here.
Well, you can see why that would chatter so badly if that's how it was really done.
Right.
I mean, that's just destined to.
I wonder if the chatter wasn't just the fairing sliding up and down the fuselage, as the gear rolled up and down the side of the fuselage.
Well, it would I mean, any flexing fore and aft would cause problems all over the place, I think. Yeah.
Right.
I think actually there are notes where Bob was talking about that outer fairing just sort of rubbing whenever the plane moved, whether it hit a rut in the open field or anything like that, and just that fairing bouncing back and forth between the side of the fuselage and that being the source of all that noise.
Well, I think that was maybe as a new and improved design concept. He comes off the GBZ, and you have a very complicated fairing that has to slide over top and stay streamlined. Well, the idea here, where the fuselage and the outer skin all share, they share the same pivot essentially. When they lay out the round circle of the fuselage, it's on the same pivot as the landing gear, and so it's just sliding along the fuselage. It should keep it relatively sealed. I think that was hey, I got a better idea. They built it and they went, yeah, well, but not quite as perfect as they'd hoped. But.
Yeah, well, on the Z, there were quite a few things where, they from an engineering standpoint, it's like, wow, that's a great idea. You have a bolt that holds the wing on, okay, but it's really being used to hold the wing only when you're flying. And then you have a bolt that holds the landing gear on, which isn't really being used while you're flying. So let's use the same bolt. And on the Z, you had the stubs of the fuselage, then the wings slid onto that, then the landing gear slid over that, and you put a bolt through it. So you couldn't put the wings on without putting the feet on, and you couldn't put the feet on unless you had the wings on. So it became very problematic, where then in the R2, they made another tab and mounted the gear, and the wings can come on and off and not affect the landing gear. So we look at this, here's some of that same Bob Hall thinking. Let's put it all on a common shaft and make all these things hinge together and use one common point. Let's try to make it all work together. And you end up with one item doing different jobs at different times, but it's so complicated.
Yep.
Well, that brings up, I have the Stinson gear leg photo up here. Should we look at that, Kevin?
Sure.
Okay. I'm not sure this is the best picture to look at, but this is the one I found. Yeah.
So what we have here, let's disregard the bottom end, the little dog leg, the round tube on there is just to make the gear leg enter into the top of the wheel pan instead of down at the axle line. But if we look at this at the bottom end of the photo, down here at the bottom, that's where the shock strut hooks on in the Stinson and then goes to a structure that's in the belly of the airplane. And then the pivot point is just a lot near the longeron. That's when we see the fat section of the gear with the tube on it there with some bracing. Right. And so this entire gear leg, you can see the weld seams down the center, the overlaps of the diamond shape there in the middle. So it's made in left and right halves and up say quarters, lower and upper quarters that are sheet metal that's folded up and welded together, and then it's all heat treated. And then the where your cursor is now is the primary pivot point. And it's actually into the floor just a little bit. It's kind of hard to see in this picture. And that gives you that stability. So now you've got your gear is rocking, but it's rocking on something that's this wide, not something that's this wide. So it has all that cantilever. Now it can be cantilever, not worried about it rocking back and forth or chattering, shaking like an RV 6-gear leg. So it's pretty stiff in that respect. So I think in my mind, this was his plan B. Plan A in the Bulldog, he had the pivot down here at the bottom of the photo, and he had the shock strut attaching at the pivot point of this one. And so his new and improved idea was to swap that. So that's how he made it better. Now we still need to have it pivot in the center and have the shock strut outboard, but we can do something much better for the shock strut because they were always I've read we had a lot of trouble with the struts on that. Air oil strut type stuff. It's kind of problematic. So
the plane is always a little tilted from side to side just because he couldn't balance them out so well. But
yeah.
Well, let's talk about somebody just said, Kevin, because I think it's one important thing for this phone call is you said that we still have to have it hinge from the center. Maybe we don't. Maybe this is a complication that we just don't want to get involved in. Tony hit me with the idea of using some Cessna gear. I can't remember where it was. And
185 gear.
Yeah, I don't know. We could custom gear maybe. We don't have to do shock absorbers at all. We're not flying off of a rutted grass, muddy field.
Right.
I don't want to have an airplane that I have to wrench on every time I go fly it. I've had that in my life before. It's not as much fun as people think, and I don't want to get stranded somewhere. I don't really want the plane to be tilted to one side, but I do agree that it is really cool the way the arrangement was really neat. I think it's part of the character of the airplane. I don't want to let go of that, but let's make sure we're getting realistic, because that's a lot of engineering work and complication. If we just went with some, more modern gear, which I guess didn't even exist at that time, they didn't have that option, right? But they do now.
Right.
So it would solve a
Steve
lot of
Whitman-
problems for us. You'd basically have a
Steve
couple.
Whitman hadn't done it yet, so we didn't have that gear.
Right. Steve Whitman. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to, unfortunately, concessions are part of this project. When I first started, I thought, man, we got to make this thing just right. So that's part of what got me involved in trying to research so much and connecting with Matt. But as this project has gone on and I've had more time to think about it and sober up a little bit, I guess, you start thinking about some things you have to concede. Like I mentioned, the tail, we don't want a tail skid with a little tiny wheel. We want a tail wheel. We have to have that, And they start thinking about other things just don't know. We don't really know how this went together. We have some good guesses. And I guess I'm more open to the idea of just making an airplane that is, that is flyable and reliable, and maybe it's the right way to go. So, Tony, you want to talk about your thought on that? You just said which Cessna gear it was, but there was a company you said we get just regular gear from, custom made.
Right. So Gearworks up in where are they, in Seattle area. They have a STC landing gear that they do. They do one in titanium. They do, of course, replacement gear legs for Cessna 180s, 185s, any of the tail dragger Cessnas. And I just talked to them briefly because I wanted some dimensions on their gear to even see if it was a way that could possibly go. And they were very open to the idea of helping us out any way we wanted. They said, we'll build you anything we want. Talk to us. This sounds like fun. So that's an option. Spring style gear. Now, some of the advantages, disadvantages are obviously it's not what it had originally. And that's, I would say, one of the real only disadvantages to it. It's not what it was originally. And I'm having a hard time letting go of that. But otherwise, it's something we can buy and bolt on, which is awesome. The weight savings if we went titanium is a big chunk of weight savings. If just using a stock 185 gear, which we don't have to do, kind of sort of bolts on. It's kind of sort of could work. We obviously would have to look into it a lot more. And then building fairings and stuff it's maybe more complicated, but we have to build fairings either way. We'd have to allow some expansion joints and stuff in them to deal with it, which Kevin has done on some airplanes, so it's very doable. The other advantage is that I think is huge is we get to put a lot more fuel in the fuselage where we'd want to have it, because it's a little more protected, inside. It opens up a lot of room. Jim had talked about a BRS chute, a ballistic recovery chute, that could go in there and still have some room for fuel. So it's something.
And of course, there's going to be somebody out there in the audience who's cringing. I'm reminded of a conversation that Tony was having with Bill Stein, who's an airshow pilot. I wasn't part of that. I was talking to somebody else at AirVenture, and Tony like, hey, Jim, yeah. Bill said, if you don't do a 1340, this is the engine. What's the point? I know that feeling. I've been there a lot with this thing. I mean, I get it. I really do. But we have to have an airplane that will be reliable for 10 years, that I can do air shows in and feel safe. I mean, I'll feel safe, but I don't have to monkey with. And lighter is way, way better, and simpler is way, way better, as we all know. I think everybody here, no offense to you, Matt, maybe not you, but I think the three of us have engineering experience. We really like the idea of lightweight simplicity. That's what makes us happy. But historicity matters too, Matt. Going back to you, that matters.
You guys
too.
are all from the experience of actually flying, whereas I'm coming from the historical standpoint. So
yeah,
the lack of a 1340 does make me go a little bit. But yeah, at the end of the day, safety is always going to be the thing, and reliability. And you know what? If we build the thing with a Wasp Junior in it, and then we retire it to museum, pull the Wasp Junior out and stick a static, non-working 1340 in it, and say, here you go. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say is I'm open to the idea of getting this thing to work, and then continuing to work on it. And it could be a 10-year journey to get to to keep monkeying with it and get the gear. I don't think probably would go back and redesign the gear. very as easily as like the engine, but I could definitely see throwing the engine on there. And I'm not trying to switch gears from the gear. Another pun I didn't mean, but to the engine. Kevin, I want to give you kind of last word on this one, because at the end of the day, if you say, Jim, this is doable. It's not going to be a problem. It's not going to chatter. It's going to be lightweight enough. Probably we'll just go with it. But so I'm kind of giving you the last word on it. And I know I have to make the decision. It's not easy for me, I want you to know, but I know I have to finally make the decision. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, when Steve and Delmar built the R2 and we built the Z, those airplanes had notoriously bad gear on them in 1931 and 32. The Z had just an oil type strut where the airplane would take off, and you see in-flight photos of the Z flying. The wheel pants are pointing downhill like this, and then when it was on ground, it looks really good. They're all nice and streamlined because the gear would stretch out, it would land, and the feet would bounce on the ground, and it would squat in on the oil. And then the R2, they got real fancy, and they used the new Mr. Bendix's air oil struts, and they had a lot of trouble with that too, collapsing struts. So Steve's solution was, let's do away with all that and make the gear semi-rigid. It's still a telescopic structure, but it has solid rubber donuts in it that makes it just not jar you. But Steve had been flying Sanson with rigid gear for so long, it's a non-event. So even now, Mac Transtrom took it a step further and didn't build the two pieces and bolt them solid. He went ahead and just welded his gear on his R2 as rigid. So there are ways to build gear to where it can look exactly like it should. It's not going to sag, and it can be lighter and not have the complication of a lot of movement, yet be something that can be this component that bolts in and that component that bolts in, instead of being all welded together like Samsung. So we can make it to where it looks good, it's stable, and it's rigid with a multitude of paths,
Right.
fabricated or purchased or whatever.
Go ahead, Tony.
On to that, if you don't mind, Jim. I did talk to Mac, and he said that they only flew a few years, if that, on Delmar's, and then they just ended up drilling a 1/4-inch hole in the thing and bolting it. And so that's why Mac just went to rigid gear.
Well, the gear has the way Steve designed it, it's got the internal sleeve is the bottom, the piston is the bottom on the fork, and it's got a slot in it about 3 inches long.
Okay.
And then there's, I think it's a 3/8 bolt that goes through it. So it's drilled through the outside unit, the cylinder, and it bolts through. So if you have no rubber in it, it will collapse down 3 inches and go up. But then Steve put in 5 inches of rubber in a 3-inch space, hydraulic press, and had the thing compressed to incredibly to get that bolt in. So it's effectively rigid.
Well, and I guess I'm countering that I don't think that lasted forever, and this is only strictly, I'd asked Mac about his rigid gear, and he said, well, Delmar ended up taking that out anyway and bolting it solid.
Could be.
That's
but it's
I never heard that story, so it was a new one to me.
I should go down there and take a fairing off and look at it.
Yeah.
It's only an hour from here.
Right.
Okay, well, we have a decision to make on that. We have to get that at some point here, but it's not urgent because you still have work to do on the fuselage truss. We were unclear about exactly where the struts attached. There was between different photos. It's kind of hard to tell what that attachment point is. I mean, obviously Tony's going to be trying to work behind you, but stay, busy. So we need to get that stuff done, of course.
Sure.
We also have the wing. We have the ailerons and stuff to talk about. Can you walk us? I'm going to move on from the gears. Everybody okay with that? I guess we probably said all we have to say. We just have to make a decision. We have to have information, the final information out there somewhere. If we do the spring gear, I suggest we just don't tell anybody. I think we just stop talking about it.
Yeah. No need to burden anyone with that information.
Yeah, we put a strut in there. No one's gonna. We just open up a little panel. There's a little strut in there. It doesn't do anything. Nobody will know the difference. I think the aileron linkage and that kind of stuff we should talk about as well. And then we'll go back maybe to the engine a little bit, if everybody's okay with that. So go ahead, Kevin. You want me to take those pictures? I think you sent us a picture on that, right?
Probably.
Okay, I've got a rendering here, and I look at. I'll bring it up. Maybe it's helpful. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, what I've been doing here lately is I've been working on trying to get. So from there, that was kind of just placeholder stuff, just trying to figure out what they did. I mean, we could tell from photographs where the hinge points were, where the aileron bell crank attachment point was. We could see a lot of that just from evidence in those photos, but couldn't understand exactly what was going inside. It's really tight in there. There's not a lot of space, so everything is really compact. I've gone through about probably 30 different scenarios of things since this early just placeholder stuff, and it just really is being difficult to try to get the aileron connection at that point, which is mid-span of or actually mid-area of the aileron. So that's, from a theoretical standpoint, connecting the linkage and the aileron right there is really the middle of where all the load is. So it's pushing inboard and pushing outboard. The circles, the blue circles you see are some other areas where there's a lot more space to actually do the work. And that's kind of where I've been working with the aileron linkage now, is working towards the inboard end. And we can actually get more normal looking componentry in there and still be able to drive the aileron just fine. So I think that's kind of where it's going. And I got that mocked up a little bit further than what you have here on this rendering. And then of course it changes the push rods and the idlers and everything else is all kind of different as it runs inboard. But I'm still working with the idea of a solid linkage, push rod linkage, push rods and bell cranks, so it's positive at all times.
Now, where on this rendering, where would the strut attach? At what point is it around this area here?
If you just below there, if you go up with your cursor towards the top of the screen and then go right now a little bit, right there, you just passed it. That is a black gray fitting in the background behind the stick.
Oh yeah, right here. I mean, you already know I feel this way. I really want to use the fairing that goes around that and just put the aileron linkage in there and drive it from the bottom of the aileron. I know that you said that the picture looks like probably it was attached to the top.
Right.
It does seem like that's possible, but it would be such a natural place to put it on the bottom.
We would
if you're going to be doing something that's not historically correct anyway. What do you think about just throwing it through there?
It's possible. But I was trying to think why. Let me look at it here on my screen.
And I don't know, maybe the way the control linkages work near the cockpit, maybe the push rod has to come on the backside of the rear spar. I mean, I don't even know. I'm not saying it's possible to do what I'm suggesting. It just, to me, it just seems like where I would expect it to go.
Yeah, but if you're on the top of the if you've got a bell crank that's running on top versus on the bottom, you can actually deal with the linkage, one way or the other. So it just puts everything on the forward side of the spar, which can get a little bit more complicated as far as getting through all the compression members and things like there. So where the behind the spar is kind of an empty space, kind of a void with not much going on.
Yeah, it makes sense. I see your point.
We just have to see what else is in the way. I mean, if it was an extra wing and it's just big blocks of nothing, it's pretty easy to go anywhere up in there.
So tubing size, it looks like the holes that we put in the ribs here. I mean, we can't have more than a 5/8 diameter push rod in there. It's just too tight. So is there an advantage? I mean, we could get a bigger diameter going forward, maybe, assuming that it didn't just run into diagonals everywhere. But we also don't know the loads necessarily going through those push rods to know that 5/8 isn't enough. What are your thoughts there?
I've got it all drawn as 3/4. Right?
3/4. Okay.
But that's just, again, placeholder. I think, and that right now they're less than 3 feet long each, so the column loads are pretty small on them.
Yeah.
So they would be hell for stout actually. So the biggest thing is if we go forward to the spar, probably got to go like 6 inches forward of the spar to get ahead of compression member fittings, drag wire plates, all that business that's on the rear spar. Or if you went on the back of the front spar, went all the way forward, more like an S2 situation, now you're going to be 6 or 8 inches off the back of the spar, just because of the structures that are there.
Yeah, so you're dealing with either real long bell crank arms or a long idler box, which needs to be beefed up. And
right, it'd be a massive
big
gearbox.
Definite advantage in keeping everything as short as possible there.
Yeah. So what else I've been working on here of the past week or so has been working on trying to get the spars farther along. getting the holes defined in the spars. I've been doing stress analysis on the wing attach, the strut attach fittings and the wing attach fittings. And so I'm able to, all that placeholder stuff that said, yeah, I don't know if it's going to look like this in that, the screenshot that Jim just put up. We're able to pull a bunch of that metal off, getting them, a little bit thinner, a little bit lighter, and narrowed up. So just working on getting the fittings proper, so we know exactly what space is being occupied. And then at the same time, as we get those dialed in, getting the hole patterns in the spar figured out. And that's really kind of been a bit of a challenge on the rear spar, to get, because it doesn't have a lot of height in a few places, especially at the butt end. So had to get a little bit creative with the shape of the rear spar at the butt end, and there's going to be a little bit of trimming on the cap strips you're going to do, and some things like that to make it to where the bolts aren't actually popping out through the skin like this, through the top surface of the spar. So we got to get enough spar material so we got a clean shot through there. But it's nothing too crazy. It's just, it's that same stuff that, we always deal with.
Yeah. I think what's impressive about this project is how little space there is in some of that. I mean, it's amazing when you actually build the part that you had in the computer. And Kevin and I have talked about this. Just, we have this one piece. It's 26A. Number 26A is this little cove piece that the cove's supposed to glue to, and then this and that. And it's, when you draw it, you go, oh yeah, that's a necessary part, and you actually make it, and you're like,
it's this big on the computer.
Yeah,
on the computer screen, it's huge.
it's teeny little. Like I was stapling them down to try and hold them down, and I almost didn't have enough room to staple with a 22 gauge or 24 gauge stapler to hold this thing. Yeah, super important. We have that one.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin, how do we resolve all this? How do we have to have, obviously, ailerons.
Yeah,
lots of different ways to do it.
I'm honing in on it now. So
okay,
what I've done is, my path right now is keeping it behind the spar, bell cranks and idlers and push rods, and it seems like we can have a damn rigid system that way. And I think what we're going to do on the aileron, early on, I had it just drawn in wood as a placeholder, but it's we're pretty confident that, at least I am, that the aileron was probably majority steel, like the Y and the Z ailerons were. But what my thinking here is that I think Jenkins did it on his E model, where he did wooden ribs on steel tube spar. So we can do a steel tube spar, had the strap style hinges like original, which is really robust. And then wooden ribs will fasten to that, wooden leading edge skin, wooden trailing edge. So it'll be a nice stiff conglomeration of a few different materials there, but it'll be a nice stiff aileron that we can drive from the inboard in without any trouble.
Next thing to consider as you're designing these ailerons is the control forces that are needed to roll the aircraft and do nice point rolls and things, which are part of the idea here. So, I don't think we want to see spades in the bottom of it. We might want to think about the aileron design and try and get some mechanical advantage or something on the ailerons.
That is one nice thing about an airplane like this, or especially something like the R2, is the stick can be really long. So you can have a lot, at your hand, you can have a lot of advantage compared to, if you're flying something like a smaller airplane that just has a short stick. So you really do have that as an advantage to work out. We'll figure out what the stick loads are going to be. But as we discussed before, that was something that I think Bob Hall and the Granvilles kind of missed the boat on. They built ailerons that were too big. They built ailerons that were for sport plane size airplanes, instead of, this airplane was built to go to the Bendix or, maybe the Thompson trophy race. So you don't really need a bunch of authority and everything on the ailerons. You can do it with a much smaller ailerons that would be much lighter, much less load for the pilot. But and the big ailerons are what caused a bunch of the snap rolling tendencies that these airplanes had. The GBs, as an example, they just had too much aileron and stalled the wing out. So we'll have to look at that, make sure that the stick forces are good for you, and you don't have to bulk up too much to be able to do something.
Okay. All right, great. Well, that kind of covers the ailerons. I think we can move on from that
Mhm.
one and talk about the engine now. So maybe just and Matt, I'm going to say you're probably for the 1340. It makes sense. That's the original. That's what it actually had, despite many websites and sources that say that the plane had a Wasp Junior, which is the 985. It did not. It had a 1340, 700 horsepower roughly engine. And now we're talking about putting a puny 985 with only 450 horsepower on it, which is obviously sacrilege. But Tony and Kevin, give me your votes. What do you guys want? Tony, go first. What do you think we should
Well,
do?
because personally, I've said all along it's going to have a 985. Jim just doesn't know it yet. I'm definitely 985. I think it's the wing loading is going to be everything on this airplane, and keeping that down. I mean, once again, it's kind of like the landing gear. The only real reason not to do it is because it didn't have it originally. The R2s and the Z, they're the R series, I guess, and the Z, they all had the advantage that they really had versions that had 985s, so you could build an accurate replica using a 985. We don't have that option. We're definitely making a concession to use a 985. I would say we still scale the cowling correctly, and then maybe someday, like Jim said, we go ahead and put a 1340 on it if everything worked out.
Kevin?
Yeah, the modern 985 that we would use, the weight of that is roughly equivalent to the 1931, 32, 1340. So the firewall forward weight by using a World War II vintage 985 comes without like within 50 pounds of what the original firewall forward would have weighed. So from an engineering standpoint and balance and everything, it's probably the better match, especially if we can keep the weight out of the back end of the airplane. From a safety point of view, the 985 is far more reliable. It just is. It's not working as hard for what it needs to do. And of the 3 1930 and 31 Model 4 junior speed mails that we restored, they originally had 1340s on them in the 30s, and we put 985s on all of them. So we built the cowling still 1340 size, and we put extensions on the baffles to seal it up. So from an outward point of view, it looks the same. It sounds the same. It goes just as fast. So to me, barring some reason that there's just no way to get enough weight in the nose to make it balance, and the extra weight would be a benefit. It's kind of like an RC model. You can sit there and hang a bunch of lead in the cowling on the firewall of an RC model, or go ahead and put a bigger motor on, to take care of the weight. So if we need the weight, I would consider the 1340. But if we don't need the weight, then I really feel a 985 is a more practical and safer method or unit to use.
Now, before we got into all this, I've mentioned the Taylorcraft that's behind Tony, my Taylorcraft that he's working on. And I said that the Bulldog is just a big Taylorcraft. It's the same thing. And this is a great example because that Taylorcraft has a 150 horsepower engine and it cruises at about 105 miles an hour. And I flew one 3 or 4 years ago that had probably an 85 horsepower engine. I was probably doing 95, it really doesn't make that much difference to have all that extra horsepower. And back of the envelope calculations, it's going to be about 15 miles an hour difference to put a 1340 on. It's not the same speed, but it's not dramatically different. You may have a 215 mile an hour cruise at sea level in the Bulldog with a 985. You might get to 230 at sea level, in cruise with a 1340. At higher altitudes, you might find there's more performance benefit. Not even sure about that, but it's still hard to make that decision. And Tony's got a good way of, he understands it pretty well. I mean, he knows I'd get to this at some point. I did ask Matt to do some research on the weights of engines, and the engine weights haven't changed. But I think what we learned since then, Kevin, is you're talking about the accessory weights as well. Is that the difference?
Yeah. A 30s vintage, like an SC or Wasp C, which would in that time period 1340, has a crankshaft that's the size of the 985 crank, the current 985 crankshaft, a 30 spline crank. So when you got into the AN1 engines or AN4s for 1340, like on an AT6 Texan, it's now a 40 spline shaft. It's another 3/4 of an inch bigger in diameter. So everything inside is bigger and heavier and beefier. And then the magnetos of the day were not much bigger than the magnetos on your Taylorcraft, but now the magnetos on a 1340 are, they're way more than a typical child. So, it's everything involved when you add in a prop governor and fuel pumps and magnetos and, the accessory drive system that's built to be able to run some gun timers and all this other stuff. There's a lot more gears and crap going on that, that's where you find in a firewall forward situation, even the exhaust ports are bigger, so the exhaust pipes are bigger. So you count in all that stuff that you need to make the engine run, and you start looking at about 300 pounds difference between a World War II 985 firewall forward on something like a Stearman or like I'm working on a Lockheed Vega, and going back to the original engine. Now that includes, in this particular case, that 300 pounds is a World War II engine having a constant speed, and then the original engine having a ground adjustable propeller, which is lighter. So in this particular case, it's probably 200 to 225 pounds difference between the two firewall forward. So it's still a significant number.
Okay, that all makes a lot of sense, and you're making a really good case. And as I said before, lighter and simpler is better, and this is lighter and simpler. We actually have a propeller that'll work nice for a 985. We found that we might just go ahead and purchase then. And I think the logic of putting a 985 and then going to 1340 later makes a lot of sense too, if we decide we just want to get that authenticity. Matt, any other thoughts on this at all? Or I think we kind of covered it. I mean, I had you do all that research, but maybe it's accessories that matter.
The only other thought I had was, have you considered your exhaust at all? The original Bulldog was built with that exhaust that goes straight through the sides of the cowling, and then 48 hours before race day in the Thompson, Jimmy Doolittle shows up in the hangar and says, "Hey, that's stupid. Let's change this. You're not going to do anything with it." So Bob rips it all out and puts in a more traditional out the back kind of exhaust system. And then you've heard in the interviews with him where he said, "Well, I lost 6 miles an hour listening to Jimmy Doolittle, and had I not done that, I would have beat the R2 and probably would have gone home with some money." But then again, you're sucking exhaust fumes the entire time too. So
I mean, I think we're pretty much married to the idea of having a collector down the bottom just for that reason alone. And if it was something that was going to fly like for one race over 20 minutes, it's different than if we're trying to survive with the airplane, do long cross countries from Oregon to Texas and things like that. That's probably just not realistic. But I am, if we can find time for it, I'd be really curious to see if that's actually true. Just as a someone who likes aerodynamics and everything, I'm just curious if that actually is true, that it would make it faster. I haven't seen a lot of other airplanes that tried that, so I don't know if there was any value to it at all.
I don't know that it made it faster. I think the modifications that he did just choked the engine down.
Yeah.
I don't think he actually changed the pipes. There's some pictures of the airplane in the hangar with the cowling off, and 100 guys working on it, a bunch of guys standing around looking at it, and you can see where the cowling mounts were the exhaust pipes. So they couldn't get rid of the pipes that were there and still attach the cowl.
Yeah.
So he just plated over them with plate, and then put fabric on the outside to slick over the hole. But I think they just literally cut a hole in the back of those pipes and let it blow out on the accessory. So
yeah, that's probably right.
If you just cut a hole and you're in there hacking a hole and you got it's about 2 inches, you can end up with a bunch of back pressure that you weren't planning on and choke yourself. And there's other stuff that was going on too at the same time.
What's the propeller you found?
AM standard 6167-15 blades. So whole prop. It's out of Washington. It's got one.
That'd be a 99-inch prop, right?
Yep. Yeah. We happened to be chatting with him at it was a guy that Jim knew, and he took it off his Howard in favor of a 108-inch 6102, right? The other one.
Yeah.
And he said, it's slower, but it makes a lot more noise with this one. So I'm going to leave the noisy 108-inch on it. You guys can have this other one. So
the 6167 is it's the pretty blade, the elliptical tip, like you see on most stagger wing beaches and things like that. It's a good looking prop.
Is that is there a better choice, Kevin?
If we could get longer blades, that would be the only thing.
We did see at AirVenture, some Howard had another 8-inch radius, like 6-inch bigger diameter propeller. And I don't know what it is, Tony. Did we ever figure that out? We didn't.
I think if we would have ever put those two Howards together, we would see those two were the same, but it and the one next to it were different. Yeah, I think he had the other blades, the more.
Well, they're quite a bit longer. The one of them was quite a bit longer. I measured with my arm. We didn't have a tape measure, but we never get a chance to talk to that guy. Well, I mean, obviously we want speed. We're not worried about how long the blade is. We want to be accurate, and we want to have the fastest we can pick.
Well, the nice thing about the 99-inch blade and why that becomes so popular, it's on fast airplanes like Howards and Stagger Wings and everything else, which is what we're basically talking about here. The same kind of speed realm, a little bit faster. So you end up with much longer than that, and you just have a lot of supersonic drag that you're creating. So at 99 inches, it still barks a lot when you've got the RPM up at 2300. So it's still going supersonic about 3 inches of the blade until you get into cruise RPM, and then you've got that forward velocity component in there too. So the longer stuff doesn't always work out better. It just, my main consideration on the longer blade is, and I don't know how long the prop was on the original. Maybe we could find that out.
It's an 8-foot Hamilton control.
It's about right. This prop is a really good match.
You're only like 3 inches over what the original one would have been. So,
all right. Well, I'm going to make a decision right now that we're going to go with a 985 engine on this project. That's the answer. So we're going to get this propeller from David, and then we're just going to design around the 985. Makes it a lot easier. So that one at least is done. We got one down.
Check it box.
Yep. And now if we can just get the gear figured out, and the wings and the fuselage and the tail, and
let's talk tail for a minute if we have a few.
Yeah.
Let's go the original, the tiny little guy.
Yeah.
No, I was actually.
We'll just build our way back up there, and then we'll beef up.
We're gonna go.
We're
going opposite, Matt. We're starting with the big one and going smaller. We're not doing it that way.
Right.
Some of those changes were for the better, I'm sure.
Yeah. Actually, I was referring to the horizontal. Kevin, did you get the email that I sent a little while ago back with details from Mac on the R2 drawing?
Yeah.
The R2 tail. So there's something we could go off of. The debate being, the steel tail that we've got weighs a lot. I think I said it earlier. Horizontal, 42 pounds of weight back there. The question is, can we do it lighter in wood? And being that the tail towards the end of the Bulldog's life got skinned anyway, it would still look authentic to have that a wood skinned tail. So wood tail versus steel tail is a question I want to discuss.
Yeah, and Beach Stagger Wing has a wooden fin, wooden horizontal stabilizer that's cantilever. So there's a lot of positives there. Something that's light and stiff, and it may have to be a little thicker. I don't know, but it's one of those things that we could actually look at the areas and draw it up and kind of get a pretty good estimate of how the weight differences would be for a strong enough wood one versus the steel one that would go there, and then compare it. See.
Yeah.
I think
is that something you want to maybe have some drawings and start working on while Kevin's working through the rest of the complications in the wing and fuselage?
Well, unfortunately, it all plays together here. It's really hard to make any decision without making all the decisions. I don't know. I'll come back to that. I was just curious.
Okay.
If you have any insight on that.
Yeah. All right. And then I think the only thing that's left on my agenda to talk about is the work Matt's been doing to show everybody about the kind of day-by-day stuff with the Bulldog. Does anybody have any other engineering aerodynamic things to discuss? Anything like that? Okay. Matt, I thought that was really cool what you're doing there. Basically every day you're giving people an update, kind of like, take them through the history of it.
We're in a really key time of year here where you're sort of living almost to the day what goes on. So I thought, as far as our social media and our Facebook group, to sort of put that history and that story out there on a day-to-day sort of announcement, so that you can see just how crammed that time period was for them, how much work they're doing in such a short span of time. You have your first flight on the 16th. We're at the 25th today, and they've already changed the rudder a few times. They've changed the vertical fin. Russ Thaw is whining about everything, and he's only really made one flight in the plane.
Yeah.
It's impressive to see how quickly a lot of work was done. It makes us all look really sad that we're taking years to do this and not 6 weeks. But I think it's a cool little thing to share with everybody. So.
Well, Jim's willing to pay up to $1.50 an hour. To work on it.
No, most of the guys were actually paying him to work for him and sort of teaching them.
See, Tony? See?
Yeah, somebody's got
paying them like $50 and they got to work.
Thanks, Matt. That's good. Don't you think in some ways it's easier to build it from scratch than to rebuild it?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
We're all this entire hour-long conversation has basically been based on trying to figure out what the hell some other guys did 90 years ago. And what were they thinking, and what tools did they have, and how did they do it, and why did they do it? And then those guys had the hunger motivation that we don't have. And,
right.
When I actually went through and did the math on the Z as an example of how many man hours did it take us to build it? Well, about 1,500 doing engineering and 4,500 building it. And you go through the 5.5 weeks those guys did it, and how many guys they had on it, and they put 4,500 hours in the airplane. It didn't take them any less time to do it. It's just fewer calendar years because they were motivated to go eat. They wanted food.
Well, if we can clear our minds then, just right there. I mean, I think that anyone who's I don't like concessions. Anybody out there who's a purist, Bill Stein, if you're out there, we don't want to make concessions either. But you can always go build your own Bulldog. No one said you have to like ours, And the bottom line is, this will probably be the only. I'm going to make a statement now. Unless someone uses the work that we're doing, this is going to be the only Bulldog replica that's been made. It maybe ever. It's a lot of work to do this. We don't have a lot of information. We're going to be solving. And really, Kevin and Tony are solving, engineering challenges to make this thing happen. And unless someone leverages our own work, I don't think they're going to be able to get this done anyway. So, I guess at the end of the day, we're going to make something that's going to be flyable. It's going to look like exactly like the Bulldog, and it's going to fly great, better than the Bulldog did by every account. And it'll probably represent what Bob Hall would have done if he had had another month and about, $15,000 more to spend on it. This is what he would have ended up with, which is really what we're trying to do anyway. We want to make him proud. And show that he had some, a winning idea, not a losing idea. We don't want to go out and have a plane that doesn't fly better. He had a lot of good stuff going on, just didn't quite come together. Well, Matt, I really appreciate that. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was going to say, and the concessions that you're talking about are education related. I mean, it's experience related. It's not aerodynamically different. We're not making the wing fat and making the wingspan 8 feet more, and putting a nose gear on it, do all kinds of things that would just totally change the airplane, make it, as I always use an analogy when I was building the GB, the Z, people were telling me, change this, change that, do this. Nobody will ever know. And I said, I don't want to build a Spezio tool holder and put a GB paint job on it. I want to build a GB and find out what it was. Structurally, we made some improvements. Some of those were the improvements that Granville's actually did. We use good brakes and good tail wheel, all the stuff that you're talking about there too. Good engine, reliable engine. So we're doing the same thing here. But when you look at it, it is the airplane. And when you fly it and you see it fly, it is the airplane. And that's really the goal.
Wouldn't it be fun, Matt, if we could get a flight of all the Bob Hall's designs at AirVenture when this thing debuts? We get, amazing designs.
Yeah, we were having this conversation before. I don't know if Tony and Kevin knew about this at all, but I think that would be an incredible thing to see go through the air at AirVenture in a couple of years. If Bob starts, with Fairchild and Granville and Stinson and works his way up to Grumman, but there's some incredible designs throughout that career. The Wildcat, the Hellcat, the Avenger, the Bearcat, all of which there are flying examples of now. Tony, you mentioned Conrad the other day and how he wants to build the Skyrocket. If we can get one of those, just an incredible career for one man, and to put that up on display would be an impressive sight.
Yeah. Well, that's the dream. That's the dream we're working towards right now.
Well, plus the Bulldog out front formation of the Bearcat. In a Bulldog, a Bearcat and a Hellcat and a Bulldog. I mean, that'd be a nice company to keep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I can't pick which airplane I'd rather fly. But yeah, I'll be the Bulldog for sure. But well, guys, that's a great. We've been here over an hour, and I think that's probably a good rundown. Are there any other big decisions we have to make right now? Kevin, seems like you got everything you need, and Tony's kind of waiting on you, but he's, I think, set. We're just kind of in a holding pattern a little bit, but we'll get through some decisions here. Anything else we have to talk about? Are we good?
I'm good from my side right now. It's just getting some more stuff knocked out and get it over to Tony.
Great. Okay, guys. Thanks a million. Don't hang up. I'm just gonna disconnect from everybody else. But let's pretend we're leaving. Okay. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.